Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at pcntv.com.
This fall, PCN is doing several panels across the state to highlight the key congressional races this year. I'm here at Bucks County Community College in the 1st Congressional District. My name is Liaga Manyofu. I want to introduce our panelists. We have Bill Pezza, political science professor here at Bucks County Community College, Danny Ceisler, attorney and political strategist, and Craig Snyder, director of Republicans for Shapiro. Now, before we start, I just want to, for transparency, clarify, do both of you want to give a little bit of your backgrounds?
I'm a registered Republican, have run for office as a Republican, but for the last 6 years have been what the press likes to call a never-Trump Republican. And my current project is a group of Republicans who are supporting Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor for Pennsylvania, in opposition to the Republican candidate, Doug Mastriano.
And I am an attorney for the Haas campaign.
So just to start off, let's get a little bit of background on the 1st Congressional District. Bill, what are some of the key, distinctions of the district? What are the candidates dealing with?
The 1st Congressional District of Pennsylvania is a classic swing district, if there is such a thing left in America. As we know, that probably 80% of districts are so skewed because of gerrymandering or districting that the outcome of a political party winner is pretty obvious before the votes are even cast. But in that remaining 20 to 25% of districts, the voter registration is usually balanced enough that the district theoretically could go either way. In the 1st Congressional District of Pennsylvania, the one in which we reside, the voter registration is almost equal. It's 42% Democrat, 41% Republican, and 16% Independent. So that's pretty, that on the surface, that would indicate that it's a district that could go either way. We can talk later about how the district has, or now if you like, about how the district has voted in the last 2 or 3 elections. You'd like to hear some of that?
Yeah, okay. You mentioned it's a swing district, so has it always been that way?
And it's also important to note whether you're in a presidential year or an off year, what we call an off year congressional election year. In 2016, Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump by 3,000 votes here in Bucks County, okay, which makes up the predominant amount of voters in the district. There's also a piece of eastern Montgomery County, which is pretty balanced in terms of voter registration, in terms of what's part of the 1st Congressional District. In 2020, Joe Biden defeated Trump by 17,000 votes, so there was a wider margin. In congressional races, in 2018, which is an off-year election, right? Not a presidential election year. Fitzpatrick defeated a strong candidate in Scott Wallace by 11,000 votes, a fairly close election. In 2020, Fitzpatrick defeated Christine Finello by 60,000 votes, and that was in a year when Trump was on the ballot. So, in spite of the fact that the voter registration is pretty balanced, Fitzpatrick has a track record of doing pretty well, especially in that last race. And we can talk about why later on.
Pennsylvania just recently got new congressional maps. How much of an impact do you think that'll have on this race?
For the congressional map?
Yes.
I don't think it would have much of an impact at all.
And this district has been redistricted in the past. So you mentioned the race with Fitzpatrick when it changed from the 8th to the 1st. Was there any big impact in sort of the demographics of the region or sort of the way that it was voting before?
No, the district stayed pretty balanced.
Yeah, just to add to that, the Pennsylvania's 1st district, and previously was the 8th district, is one of the only districts in Pennsylvania that actually made sense. Because Bucks County is about the size of a congressional district. It's a little smaller than a full congressional district. So where you get that extra 50,000, what part of Montgomery County or Northeast Philadelphia it comes from may change, but that's just the fringes. It's actually districts that's always, for the most part, made sense. So redistricting didn't change it that much this time around either.
Yeah, I think it's been fairly constant that Bucks County is by far the center of the district and really kind of the center of what happens in the results of the elections. However, I ran former Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick's campaign here way back in 2006, and he lost that race by just a sliver, and the entire loss was in the Northeast Philadelphia part of the district. Even though it was a little tail on the district, it was was enough to switch the seat to then Congressman Murphy. So redistricting can certainly matter, even at the margins. This year, this place, this time, I don't think it will, but sometimes it has.
I'd like to comment on that race because Fitzpatrick lost that year in what I consider to be a perfect storm. People couldn't wait to get to the polls to vote against the Republican candidate for senator and for governor.
Yes.
And so he ran ahead of those numbers in the district, but that was part of what contributed to the loss. So in this case, it's going to be important to see how the Fetterman-Oz election and the Mastriano-Shapiro election plays out because of down-ballot voting.
And sort of tracing Brian Fitzpatrick's journey from when he was first elected to now, is he the same candidate that he was when he was first elected, or has he kind of evolved in his position?
Well, I think the Fitzpatricks have all, actually you would probably be better to comment on it than I, so I'll defer to you on the Fitzpatricks.
Well, I mean, I think Brian Fitzpatrick in particular has shown, great subtlety, really, in being able to manage this complicated swing district. He survived the blue wave in 2018 in a way that his brother had not survived the blue wave in 2006, and then he increased his margin, as the professor said, in 2020 to a really whopping win. So you would say he starts off in a really good spot. However, this is a district that can go either way. It's one of the purplest districts in the country, and there are lots of forces at work, I think, in this race that still make it possibly quite close at the end.
Sure. I think Brian Fitzpatrick's staying power to a certain extent, it has to do with two things. First, it's his reputation as a moderate, and this is a swing district. It's a purple district, and there's a perception that he is right down the middle. And he used to have these signs, and they'll probably be back again this year, and they say most independent member of Congress, because some think tank named him most independent member of Congress. And I think a lot of Democrats certainly would think it's quite calculated when he gives you the vote right when you don't need it. If a bill's about to pass and it's a Democratic bill, maybe he'll be the one Republican to vote for it. But he certainly cultivated a perception that he is an independent and a moderate, and that's very important for this district. And also, he is excellent at retail politics. He is ubiquitous in the district. He's everywhere. He goes to every opening of something or Boy Scout event, VFW hall. He's someone who is well known and appreciates the value of retail politics. So I think those are the two reasons why he's certainly run ahead of national Republicans here and has managed to hang on.
I think we should add that when he faces a perennial threat on the right, where about 30% of the Republican electorate votes against Brian Fitzpatrick when he runs in the primaries. And then the question is whether they come home, in the general, which they almost always do. But that's an issue. He can't cater to their far right or at least further right desires and still have the moderate persona that he likes to project. So that's an issue. And I've been saying, just want to throw this plug in because I do it every chance I get. I wish we would allow independents to vote in primary elections. If we did, it would moderate candidates on both sides to the middle, which I think our country needs now, but that's not going to happen.
Here on that. I think there's a real question as to whether all the Republicans will come home, and there is a Libertarian Party candidate on the ballot. Who's a MAGA candidate, pro-Trump candidate. So they've got a place to go if they want to express a protest vote. In a close election, those third and fourth party candidates, could have an impact. So that remains to be seen.
Caroline Avery.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who was Brian Fitzpatrick's challenger in this most recent primary? Do we know?
That tells you something.
Yeah.
Well, but how about this? Was it close?
No.
Not at all. Okay.
It was 69% to 30%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So let's talk about who he's going against in the general.
I'm sorry. It was Alex Entin, E-N-T-I-N.
There we go. Okay. Same result, though. So let's talk about who he's going against in the general election, Ashley E. Haas. Can you just give a little bit of background of what kind of candidate she is?
Sure. So Ashley's, I think, a somewhat different candidate than Brian Fitzpatrick has faced in the past. She is young. She's 33 years old. Actually, she's 34 years old as of last week. She came from a pretty rough upbringing, single mother, in and out of poverty at times, and was able to work her way up to going to West Point, and from West Point became an Apache pilot. So I'll tell you, I was in the Army, and the smartest people became the pilots, and the best pilots became the Apache pilots. So she was at the top and one of the only women Apache pilots that I've ever met in my entire life. From there, she had multiple deployments to Iraq. She was a commander and got out and went to Oxford. So she's a remarkably bright young woman and an energetic and dynamic candidate. And though she is a veteran and has an outstanding military background, really running on an economic message and a populist message, and trying to tap into the frustration that a lot of people have with Washington, D.C., and with politicians in general. And she's able to say, I have been there. I have experienced the issues that a lot of people in Bucks County have experienced. And I think that is something that separates her from some of the people who have challenged Brian Fitzpatrick in the past. And to the extent she's able to get out that message and raise the money to get out that message, it will make her a very formidable challenger to Brian.
And speaking of Fitzpatrick and some of his previous challengers, if you're in the shoes of some of his campaign folks, what kinds of things are they thinking about, and how are they going to combat Ashley's campaign?
I would say that the thing they have to really be the most concerned about is the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe versus Wade, and what that will do to turnout and to enthusiasm. I think Ashley is a formidable candidate, exactly as Danny said, for a lot of reasons. It's a very impressive life story already at a young age, and she brings a lot of passion and energy to the campaign, including to this issue of abortion rights in particular, where she was among the people who went out and protested at Fitzpatrick's office after the Dobbs decision. So, I think that could be the wild card in the race. I'm not so sure that the economic populist message really will do it. This is an upper income, upper educated district by comparison to most in the country. Median household income over $90,000, about 45% college educated district. So I'm not sure that necessarily would be the locomotive. But I think the abortion rights question really could be, because Fitzpatrick is pro-life. He does take some sort of tactical votes that try to be more moderate, quote unquote, but he's pro-life. He's appeared at the national pro-life rallies in Washington with President Trump even at one point. So that I think could be a real wedge issue, and we got to watch how the voters in this district in particular respond to that.
Sure, and I think there was a poll that came out shortly after the Dobbs decision, which shows that when voters in this district are informed of Brian Fitzpatrick's pro-life policies, voting to codify Roe v. Wade, or voting against codifying Roe v. Wade twice, including after the Dobbs decision, his support collapses. I think Ashley's poll had her up 9 when voters were educated about those issues. So that's something. But in terms of the economic populism, whether that will land, I agree this is an upper income district for the most part. But one thing about Bucks County is it's really, you guys can disagree, 3 different places. There's lower Bucks County, there's middle or central Bucks County, and then there's upper Bucks County. Lower Bucks County is a more blue collar, working class. Really, it's an extension of Northeast Philadelphia in a lot of ways. And there you're seeing a lot of Democrats who may be becoming Trump voters and maybe moving away from the Democratic Party. And I think bought into, certainly in Bristol and in Bensalem, buying into Donald Trump's economic populist message that maybe, Ashley's messaging will resonate with, maybe not. Time will tell.
I agree about the 3 different counties, and one of the strengths that Fitzpatrick has had is that he's from Lower Bucks County, and he has a lot of contacts there, that it's easier to build those contacts. Bucks County is a big county. If you want to ride to Quakertown sometime, you can remind yourself of that. That helps him. He has a labor record that's decent for a Republican. He has police and firemen that like where he's been. So that's an issue. Another issue that Ashley has is name recognition, as we have in any election. People, when you've been a multi-term congressman, people know who you are. You get those free mailers from franking privileges that the Congress has. They can contact you a couple times a year. And Ashley has to work on name recognition and getting that out there, and that takes money. And I assume at some point in this discussion we'll talk about money, which is a little bleak on the Democratic side right now.
Definitely. And, how are some of these candidates getting their messages across? Of course, in some previous elections with the pandemic, of course, some candidates might have had to rely on that name recognition. So how are they getting their messages out, and is it maybe different from how they were approaching it a couple years ago?
It's interesting, if I can just jump in there first, because challengers want as much publicity as they can get. Incumbents, especially this time around, almost want as little as they can get. You're in the lead. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to have to answer too many questions. And I think that's pretty much been Fitzpatrick's approach. Very controlled environments when he is speaking to the press or he is speaking to the public. And on the other hand, I guess these guys can speak more to what Ashley can do or has done to get more exposure.
Sure. You certainly have an advantage when you're an incumbent. Brian Fitzpatrick has been all over the news. He's in the Courier-Times, which is our local paper here in Bucks County. He's in the New York Times and Politico. So he's taking advantage of the advantages of incumbency. Whereas when you're a challenger, you have to be a lot more creative. There's two ways you can get your name out there. There's paid media. You can be on TV, you can be on the radio, you can have lawn signs, and certainly Ashley Haas is going to try and do everything she can to raise the money to get out on TV. It's very, very, very expensive. I think Ashley's raised somewhere in the mid six figures, and I think last time Brian Fitzpatrick's numbers came out, he was actually lower as far as the incumbents in Pennsylvania were. I think he had only just over about $1 million the last time the campaign reports came out, which compared to Susan Wild in the Lehigh Valley and Matt Cartwright and some other people who are being challenged, it was a lot lower. But Ashley Haas also needs to capitalize on, I think the abortion issue has been the biggest thing for her. She is getting out at rallies. She is giving some really interesting, creative statements. I know her campaign is using TikTok and using Instagram and Facebook as effectively as I've seen really any campaign. She's a younger candidate, and she is tapping into new media. Now, Bucks County isn't exactly the youngest district in the United States, but she's just getting as creative as she possibly can to get out there.
So, as we heard at the outset, the two candidates basically start this race in a tie in terms of the Republicans versus the Democrats, people who usually vote for the one team or the other team. They basically start at a tie. The question is, where do those independent voters go? I mean, it's not the only question. There is a question of, do all the Democrats stay with the Democrat? Do they come out and vote? And likewise on the Republican side. But for the most part, this race is going to be decided by that 16% independent vote. So how do you talk to them? The relatively low level of money coming into this race, for both candidates, is a mark of the sort of the national donor evaluation that the race isn't really that hot of a race. In other words, there's sort of a presumption, and frankly, it's on both sides because the money is low on both sides, that the incumbent's likely to be reelected. Those other races that Danny was talking about in the state are getting a lot more money because people think that there's a real chance for a change there. There's a real chance that the incumbent's going to lose, the challenger's going to win, and so there's more money going in. Having said that, it doesn't mean that Ashley is by any means out of the game. She will not have enough money to buy a whole bunch of Philadelphia TV commercials because they're very expensive, one of the most expensive markets in the country. It's a big city. But she may well have enough money to do a lot of interesting digital advertising. And if she targets the right voters, because you don't have to talk to everybody, you just have to talk to the people who are going to make the swing, there's definitely still in the hunt to be able to do that.
I agree. If we boil it down to just the traditional ways to campaign, she's not going to have much of a chance. Not with the numbers, and the numbers are low for the reason you said. The national committees, I want the students in the room at least to know this, there are people on the national level, Republican National Committee, Democratic National Committee, campaign committee, who just look at races and they have millions and millions of dollars to allocate across the country. And they make those decisions on where to allocate them based on where they think it'll do some good. So if the Republicans think Fitzpatrick's going to win, they don't need to send a lot of money there. If the Democrats think Ashley's going to lose, they don't need to send money there. So those calculations are being made all the time. So that said, we live in a new world, you know it, digital media, social media, and if she can capitalize on that, it can compensate for a lot of the funding deficiencies that she has.
Can we expect any debates between the candidates?
Well, we're going to have one here on October 25th. Bucks County, the Lower Bucks campus of Bucks County Community College has sponsored a congressional debate in every election, I think, since 2008 or 2004, and I've been the moderator for it. And both candidates have agreed to debate here, right outside, right in our atrium here, on October 25th at 12 o'clock.
Do both candidates like to debate? Brian Fitzpatrick, is he someone that likes to get out and talk to?
I think he recognizes that that's part of the process. That's what you do. And I don't know that he would, that he'd accept every invitation, but if there's a kind of a long-standing tradition like this one, he knows he has to show up.
Yeah, and obviously the rule of thumb, well, not obviously, but the rule of thumb is that the challengers will want to debate more and that the incumbents will want to debate less. It's a great opportunity for challengers to trip up an incumbent or to get their name out there. So, I'm certain Ashley would want to do any debate she could possibly do.
And there's a lot of jockeying that goes on about when the debate will be. So the incumbent would like it to be as late in the season as possible. So if something does happen that helps the challenger, there's not enough time for that to sit in. And the challenger would like it to be early and often, as you said. Ours is October 25th, so you can read into that what you like, but it's pretty close to the election.
I want to get a little bit of a poll from some of our students at this point. Danny was describing the differences in some of the areas in Bucks County. How many of you are from this district or live around here? And okay, a lot of you. All of you, actually, right? Yeah. Is his description accurate? You think there's very distinct regions and they kind of vote differently? I also wanted to ask, have you guys been following this race, or do you follow congressional races usually, or are you just kind of learning about the candidates and you kind of figure it out closer to? Here, a show of hands. How many of you have been following the race so far? Okay, good. Well, let's shift to some of our statewide races with some of our more well-known candidates statewide. We have John Fetterman, who's our current lieutenant governor at the moment, vying for the he's the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate. He does not fit the usual sort of image of a politician or a candidate. What are some things that people like about him?
Exactly what you just said. So for those of you who don't know who John Fetterman is, actually, do you guys know who John Fetterman is? If there's any candidate you guys would know, it would probably be John Fetterman. So John Fetterman is our 6'7", probably 285-pound, bald, bearded, hoodie-wearing, shorts-wearing lieutenant governor who does not fit the mold of a traditional politician. That's what people love about him. I think when you spend so much time in political circles, you have a sense of what someone should look like. But, when you get out and you actually talk to voters, there's a lot of frustration with politics as usual, and John Fetterman is disrupting that. He was the mayor of a very small town outside of Pittsburgh called Braddock. It is a real kind of struggling old industrial town, and he was a very active, aggressive mayor there. He ran for United States Senate in 2016 against Katie McGinty and Joe Sestak, who are kind of two establishment-esque candidates, and he ran this insurgent progressive campaign, and out of nowhere finished a very strong third and was able to parlay that into running for lieutenant governor. So he's very progressive. He's about as far left as we've had a Democratic nominee, but it's a lot of it's from a kind of everyman, blue collar, populist kind of persona. He's different, but that's exactly what people like about him, and not just people love him. People love him. He has kind of a celebrity status here.
And he ended up winning every county in his primary. For people like Brian Fitzpatrick or maybe Connor Lamb, who he was going up against, who kind of do fit that, classic mold of a politician, does his success mean a shift in sort of what Democratic voters are looking for, or is he more of an anomaly, do you think?
In terms of what Democratic voters are looking for?
Yes.
I think he's a character unto himself. I mean, he's a special phenomenon. I don't think we want all of our, speaking on behalf of Democrats, I don't think we want all of our politicians to be wearing shorts, and hoodies. But I think there's a frustration with politics as usual, and he's a disruptor, and people enjoy that. I don't think there's going to be a shift towards all Fetterman-esque candidates.
Yeah, I used to think, I've spent a lifetime studying politics and teaching politics. I used to think I knew something about it, and then Donald Trump got elected, and I realized I knew just about nothing. But the shift predominantly when Trump got elected was that white, blue-collar, non-college educated males voted for Donald Trump in ways that used to be one of the mainstays of the Democratic Party. And I think Fetterman offers an opportunity that some other Democrats don't in appealing to that kind of voter. And that could mark a shift statewide in this election. I don't know. We'll see. But I think that persona lends itself to that. He said, I don't look like your normal politician. Humor is important in politics. He said, I don't look like your normal politician. I don't even look like your normal person. But he's running for office, and I think he's got people's attention.
I've read some pundits out of Washington saying that, the day after Fetterman wins the U.S. Senate race this year in Pennsylvania, if he does, that he's automatically in top-tier presidential contender for the Democratic Party, because he will have done something such a different path and in such a different way, particularly in terms of sort of potentially returning to the Democratic fold some of these people who went to become Trump voters in 2016, that would sort of place him instantly as a national figure. So there are people that are thinking very grand things about John Fetterman. We'll see what happens. What's absolutely clear, sort of indisputable, is that he's really unique. He is different than other kinds of politicians. Whether or not that becomes, sort of a popular brand that people want to buy and emulate, or whether it's sort of a one-off, we're sort of fixing to find out. Now, he's had this terrible setback of having the stroke right before the primary, he was never particularly interested in debating Oz, but now his unwillingness to debate Oz is in a lot of quarters being seen as, well, does he just not want to do it, or can he not do it because he's really physically limited by the results of the stroke? The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a Democratic-leaning newspaper, editorialized just, I think, yesterday that if Fetterman is unable to debate, it means he's unable to serve. So we'll see what happens.
One concern I have for the Fetterman campaign is he's had a good time. Now, I'm going to use a term that I haven't used since I taught Reconstruction after the Civil War. I use the term carpetbagger, all right? A carpetbagger is a person who, in the post-Civil War era, Northerners who moved south to get the black vote because whites were disenfranchised for a while because they had committed rebellion. And Fetterman has had a good time painting Dr. Oz as someone who's from Jersey and came here, he packed up his bags and came here to run for office as an opportunist. And that was fun for a while. And he hired Snooki to do a commercial for him, from Seaside. And he had planes flying over the Jersey shore saying, Dr. Oz, we miss you, and stuff like that. But ultimately, he needs to talk about issues. And he is one of the more liberal candidates on the national scene. So sometimes he says things First of all, I don't think he's talked about issues as much as one would expect by this point in the campaign. But when he does, he has said some things that are pretty far left that might hurt him with the middle of the voters. For example, he said that, well, I don't want to say that. He may not have. The rumor is that he said he favors there should be no restrictions on abortion whatsoever. That would turn off middle voters who say, we're satisfied with the law as it is. So I'd like to hear more from Fetterman about his position on issues.
And making fun of Oz, he's running a very funny campaign.
Yes.
Very clever. He's given Oz a hard time because Oz has a lot. I guess we haven't been asked about Oz yet, but he has a lot of negatives. And Dr. Oz has been, so he's the Republican nominee for Senate, and he had a bruising primary where he was running against a guy named David McCormick and a few others, and just got beat up for like 6, 7 months, 8 months about being a fake Republican and about not being from Pennsylvania, and now you have Fetterman coming in, and he's just absolutely hammering him for being from New Jersey, but also for being a rich guy who's completely out of touch with Pennsylvanians. And that's one of Oz's big issues. McCormick couldn't hit him quite as much on that because McCormick was also ultra-rich. But Fetterman does make that nice contrast with Oz because Fetterman, at least his persona, is that he is a blue-collar guy. Now, there's some issues with that persona, but that's the persona, and that's what people believe and buy into. And Oz made one of the great unforced errors that I've ever seen any candidate make. Did any of you see the crudité video? So do you know what crudité is? Yeah. It's like if you put a bunch of vegetables on a tray and you serve it out at a party. It's like carrots and celery. So Oz filmed a video of himself going to a grocery store and trying to say, Biden's inflation is so terrible, I can't afford, to make a crudité platter. And nobody calls it crudité, and he picks out the weirdest vegetables for this platter that no one's ever put, like asparagus on a platter, and he pronounces the name of the grocery store wrong. It's a chain that's all over Pennsylvania, and he picks the weird vegetables, and he's just like a guy trying to impersonate a normal human being. So Oz certainly hasn't been doing himself any favors, but the takeaway is go watch the video.
Yeah, the reason why Oz went on to win that heavily contested primary was that Trump ultimately endorsed Oz. And that works in a primary. It's questionable about what works in a general election. One of the things that I think privately mainstream Republicans who want to win elections have arrived at is the idea that in certain states and in certain congressional districts, Trumpism no longer plays, that it's not a benefit to the candidates. So with the recent things happening, whether it's Mar-a-Lago or the January 6th hearings or whatever, Trump is back in the news. And when Trump's in the news, he kind of sucks the air out of the room. He is the news. So there was a campaign rally in Wilkes-Barre, was it, recently, where it was supposed to be a rally for Oz and Mastriano. And Trump ended up talking for 80 minutes about himself, and oh, by the way, these guys are here and they're running for office. I don't know what impact that will have, getting back to the 1st Congressional District. What impact will Trumpism and the revival of Trump in the news have on a Fitzpatrick-Ehaz election?
So let me just go back to the Senate race for a second, just frame this for the students in particular. The United States Senate right now is 50-50, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, dead even. The Democrats are in control because the Democratic vice president gets to vote with the 50 Democratic senators. So if the Republicans can pick up even just one seat, right, then control of the Senate shifts. It's a major, major change in the direction of policy in the country. The Pennsylvania Senate seat is held by Pat Toomey, who's retiring. He's a Republican, so he's one of the 50 Republicans. If the Democrats can flip that, can take that with John Fetterman, then their chance of holding the Senate as a whole is a lot greater, right? Because they've taken away one of the Republican 50. You would think that such an important race with really important national implications like that, frankly, would be a better race than the one we're watching. I want to agree with my colleagues. Essentially, Oz is running like the worst campaign I've ever seen. You couldn't make it up. Fetterman, on the other hand, isn't running much of a campaign at all. And perhaps that's because he just hasn't been able to, because he's been recovering from a serious health problem. So you have this very, very important, nationally important election in which neither side is really sort of competing the way you would have expected it to be.
From the Oz campaign's perspective, how do you deal with your opponent having such a health issue? It's a touchy issue, of course, but you can't ignore it either. What do you do in that situation?
I think he should be careful, and he should make it clear that he wishes John Fetterman as a human being nothing but health, right? Period, full stop. He also needs to say that things like debates are a part of a race, and that if Fetterman is resisting them, he needs to tell the voters why. It can't just be kind of a cat and mouse game. So if he's resisting them because he is in fact physically impaired, it does raise questions as to his fitness for the job. I mean, the job of being a senator, I worked for former Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter for a number of years. The whole job of a senator is debating. It's what you do all day long, every day. And if you can't do it in a campaign, you can't do it in office.
And there was no better debater than Arlen Specter. I worked on his race too. He was the best.
If I can make an analogy, the one thing that might be in Fetterman's favor with regard to being unable to get out there on the campaign trail and being as visible as you like. We just had a presidential election that was basically run from the front porch of people's houses. We were in the middle of COVID, and that expectation that we want our candidate all over the place went away, and Biden was able to defeat Trump without getting out there that much. And so we may be getting used to that a little bit. People like retail politics. They like you to knock on their door. They like you to be in a place where you could go see them. And that didn't happen that much, although Biden did come to this campus during the campaign. But that didn't happen that much, and it's not going to happen that much in the Senate race. We'll see how it plays.
And speaking of Oz, just as a candidate, he's, we've been talking about him. He's a famous celebrity doctor. What issues is he running for? What is sort of his campaign message?
Well, when I say he's running one of the worst campaigns I've seen, part of the reason for that is I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know what the message is, other than I'm not John Fetterman. John Fetterman is a very progressive Democrat. He's too left for Pennsylvania. I mean, that's essentially what it boils down to. But there's not much of a positive what he wants to do. He accepted enthusiastically the endorsement of Trump in the primary, and you would expect that when the general election came, that a candidate would try to make a turn and appeal to a broader section of the electorate. Hasn't really happened very much. When you can't, this close out, we're after Labor Day now, when you can't identify a candidate's message, that campaign's in trouble.
And Danny, you mentioned some of the fun things that the Fetterman campaign is doing. But what are some of the things that are besides the health issue, of course? What are some of the things that people might be critical of him? You mentioned his sort of persona that people might have some issues with.
Why would people be critical of Fetterman?
Yes.
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, there is the persona, which I think is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. There's the lack of policy specifics. I think he's running on his persona and on the idea of, he's the working man against the big, wealthy politicians and people in D.C., but that's kind of an amorphous message. It's not specific. And the policy positions he has put out there tend to be probably to the left of where Pennsylvania is on gun issues, on health care issues, potentially on choice issues. So, I mean, he is as far left as pretty much any statewide nominee we've ever had. So I think that would be the criticism of him.
And if we want to kind of explore the hypothetical that Craig was talking about of Fetterman becoming a big figure on a national stage, those values that you said are kind of left from the typical Pennsylvania senator, how do those play out kind of on a larger stage?
Well, there's always room on the national stage for someone on the left flank. I mean, you have Bernie Sanders now, and I think Fetterman might be a little more towards the center than Bernie, but you have Bernie, you have Elizabeth Warren, you have AOC. I think Fetterman kind of slots right in there, but he slots in there as somebody who has won, in theory, in a swing state, which Bernie Sanders has never done, which Elizabeth Warren has never done, which AOC has never done. I mean, if Fetterman wins, it's not because he got all the people on the left. If John Fetterman is our next senator, it's because he's doing better in Scranton, in Lower Bucks County, in Johnstown, in Erie, in the parts of Pennsylvania that Democrats have been hemorrhaging. So if he does win this election, he's going to have a lot of credibility going into D.C. on the left flank.
When we talk about Pennsylvania, James Carville famously said Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. And you need that Pittsburgh vote, which I think Fetterman can do well in. But the other two ingredients, and the one that Carville did not mention, are the collar counties of Philadelphia: Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, Delaware, suburban counties that went for Biden. I don't know how Fetterman plays with the suburban women, educated suburban women in those counties. I don't know how it'll go. And I also don't know what the African-American turnout will be in Philadelphia, because that always determines the outcome of an election in Pennsylvania. And I don't know whether you guys are tuned into that or not, or how that's going, but
when the election started, the general election started after the primary, I actually thought, if somebody had said you have to bet today, I probably would have bet on Oz. And the reason, one of the reasons would have been that Fetterman really doesn't have a base of enthusiastic support in the African-American community in Philadelphia, which, as you say, is determinative often of statewide elections. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016 basically because there were fewer African-American votes for Hillary Clinton in the city of Philadelphia than there had been in prior elections for President Obama. That difference is almost exactly what Trump's margin was in the state as a whole. So it's very important. So I would have said, Oz has a pretty good shot because Fetterman doesn't have that kind of enthusiasm in the African-American community. But as we've all said, Oz has done such a lousy job as a candidate that I think at this point, it's a jump ball.
Yeah, in terms of the collar counties of Philadelphia, so you have Montgomery, Delco, Bucks, Chester. There's more voters there than there are in the city of Philadelphia, and they tend to be more moderate. But when it was Fetterman versus Lamb, I think going into it, we thought Connor Lamb would do really well in the Philadelphia suburbs, and did not do nearly as well against Fetterman as we would have expected. Fetterman did great in the collar counties. So at least in that test, in more moderate Democratic voters, he did very, very well.
And one would think that the Dobbs ruling would make it likely he'll do even better than he did in the primary.
Sure.
Now is probably a good opportunity to bring up fundraising and campaign finances. How are both candidates in the Senate race stacking up with fundraising?
So there's two ways to think about this. There's how the candidates themselves are doing, and then there's kind of outside spending. From the candidates themselves, Fetterman is blowing Oz away. And he's doing it with small donations, which is incredible. He's doing it with donations of $25, $50 at a time from people all across the country online. But the candidates' fundraising is getting dwarfed by outside spending and by what the national, like Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican Leaders PAC, and then Chuck Schumer has a national PAC. And if you count the outside spending, Fetterman's getting outspent 3-1 on television in Pennsylvania right now. So that's one of the reasons why this race is going to get closer, because Oz hasn't had the resources that his opponents have had. He's been getting beat up for the last year, but now he's starting to tighten the gap because the national money is coming in, and it is weighing heavily in favor of Oz.
So this is the difference, or one of the differences between what we were talking about in the House race versus the Senate race. In the House race, there's not a lot of money pouring in because people don't necessarily think that it's that competitive. At the Senate race, there's tons of money pouring in, regardless of whether people think it's competitive. In other words, the outcome is so important. Who replaces Pat Toomey is so important to national politics that all of this national money is flooding in. So you're going to see, if you watch TV in Pennsylvania over the next 8 weeks, you're going to see a lot of advertising in favor, particularly of Oz, to try to keep that seat in the Republican column when Toomey retires.
Are TV ads effective?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're the most effective way to campaign. You can't meet everybody. You're not going to meet 99.9% of the voters. The way you connect with people is through TV advertising. And one point on Oz and the money that's coming in, Fetterman he has a lot of potential negatives. And I brought up some of them earlier, but he had an incident with a jogger in western Pennsylvania where he pulled a gun on a black jogger in his neighborhood. He can get tied potentially into the rise in crime in Philadelphia. At least that's what Republicans are going to try to do. And he's never really been tested. He ran in the lieutenant governor's race, but there's not a lot of money there. When he was running against Connor Lamb, there was only so much money there. And this is the first time that he's really going to be challenged. And when you talk about $40 million on TV against him, it's going to be a really harrowing stretch for him coming up.
Everybody says they don't like political commercials, that they turn them off or they mute them, they don't pay attention to them, they make them angry. Everybody says that. But the absolute fact is that if you have a race in which there's a lot of TV spending, you can watch the numbers, the polling numbers, who's voting for which candidate change as those TV ads go on and off, and particularly ones that are effective. People do, even though people don't want to respond to them, they do. They work.
Two other observations about TV ads. First is that in any campaign, what you want to do is define your opponent before she defines you. And I think Fetterman did a good job early in trying to define Oz as an aloof, wealthy, detached person from another state. And only now Oz is starting to define Fetterman as a radical, reckless liberal who wants to let all prisoners out of, lifetime prisoners out of prison and so on. And that's going to be important to watch. And the other thing is that negative ads work far more than positive ones. That unfortunate. We all say we don't like negative ads, and what the candidates do is they don't run negative ads of their own. They get an interest group to run the negative ads for them, and that just it matters.
I want to shift focus to our governor's race now. Our first candidate I want to talk about is Josh Shapiro. He's the current Attorney General in Pennsylvania. He's another person who fits that kind of classic mold of a politician. What does he bring to the table?
The literal exact opposite of John Fetterman. It's interesting to compare the two because John Fetterman is a disruptor, and Josh Shapiro is the opposite of that. He is someone who has been in politics since his late 20s. He was a chief of staff for a congressman for Montgomery County, and then he became a state representative, and then he became a county commissioner, and then he became an attorney general. And by pretty much all accounts, has been very effective in each position. He is a steady hand. He is not far left. He's an effective manager and administrator. And in some ways, it makes more sense for the position of governor, where you don't want, or at least many people don't want, a wild card there. They want a steady hand. So that's what Josh Shapiro is saying. He's saying, I'm going to be a sane, smart, steady, compassionate leader in the governor's office, as opposed to Doug Mastriano, who is arguably not that.
And in the primary, he ran totally unopposed. Were there any whispers of somebody else trying to join the race, or was he always kind of the anointed one?
I think anytime you have one candidate, there's going to be particularly from the far left, you might hear whispers, but pretty much from the beginning, this was Josh Shapiro's race. He is a juggernaut in Pennsylvania politics, and particularly in Democratic politics. He is a hard worker. He is all over the Commonwealth, and I think, going back to right after he was reelected for Attorney General, this was really his race, and everybody knew this was his race.
And when you complete 8 years of being Attorney General with no blemishes, no scandals, and a track record, a very high success track record in terms of going after some big cases and winning, he was the ideal candidate. I think it would be hard to run against him.
Shapiro got more votes than any other candidate on the ballot in Pennsylvania in both 2016 and 2020, meaning more than the two presidential candidates who won in those years, Trump in 16 and Biden in 2020. He outpolled both presidential candidates of both parties. So he has been a vote juggernaut. And I think it was sort of a no-brainer that he would be the Democratic nominee. What he wasn't necessarily expecting at the beginning was that he would face a Republican who would be so different, so much of a disruptor, so much of an unconventional kind of figure.
Now, we know Josh Shapiro, as you mentioned, he's been in politics for a long time, but his competitor in this race is Doug Mastriano. He joined the race in kind of a wide Republican field. How did he set himself apart from the rest?
He was by far the most loyal to Donald Trump. He was, there's sort of what they call the MAGA or Make America Great wing of the Republican Party. He was ultra MAGA. And he proved that on a whole variety of issues. For me, most importantly, the issue of endorsing President Trump's lies about the 2020 election. So you have a Republican candidate for governor who believes or says he believes that Donald Trump actually won the state of Pennsylvania in 2020, actually won the national election in 2020, that Donald Trump is the actual legitimate president of the United States today, and that all future elections have to be really changed so that what he says falsely was a stolen election isn't repeated again. There are lots of other issues you can talk about with Doug Mastriano, but I think there's only one that you need to talk about, which is what I just said. Essentially, this is somebody who has abandoned the Constitution of the United States, the rule of law, and frankly, if he actually believes it, he's abandoned sanity, because there's no evidence whatsoever that those claims are true.
There's a lot of speculation that mainstream Republicans, that other people in that primary were more electable in the general election than Doug Mastriano. And that's a microcosm of what's happening across the country. And there's a big risk taking place here where Trump endorsed far-right candidates, election deniers across the country, and it remains to be seen whether that will work in a general or whether it's really going to come back to bite them. And Mitch McConnell basically said recently that we have poor candidates running across the country that are far less electable than they would have been had we gone with more moderately conservative candidates. And that's going to play out here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Which goes into the very, calculated and risky move that Josh Shapiro's campaign did in the primary. So Josh Shapiro's campaign actually ran ads that were nominally attacking Doug Mastriano for being the most loyal Donald Trump supporter, and that and they were running, by the way, on Fox News and hitting right-wing audiences in the primary, really to try and boost Doug Mastriano. So this was a Democratic candidate putting money into a Republican's primary race to try and get Doug Mastriano the nomination, because he would be Josh Shapiro's best chance to win that race.
And how much support does he have from fellow Republicans?
Well, I think most Republicans will come home, because we live in a really hyper-polarized time where a lot of people have this very strong identity as being on the blue team or the red team. And for that group of people, and it's more than 40% of the electorate on each side, so more than 80% of the electorate altogether will vote for essentially anyone who's nominated by the Republican or Democratic Party for their offices. And that's why I go back to what I said earlier, that the independent voters and independent-minded voters, who maybe are 20% of the electorate, maybe not even that many, get to decide. They're really the people who get to make the swing. And here in Bucks County, it's kind of the epicenter of swing voters for this area, for sure.
And the wild card will be the Dobbs ruling in terms of how will Republican women in those Collier counties and everywhere react. Will that be the button that they push? That's the determining factor for this campaign, or will it be the economy and other things? But if it's abortion, then it's going to hurt Mastriano.
I want to use our last couple minutes to see if our students have any questions on any of the races that we've discussed, the governor's race, the Senate race, the congressional race. What questions do you have for the panelists? Go ahead. Oh, would you be able to stand at the mic over there? Good.
I was just wondering if you could get a little bit more information about Doug Mastriano's political background. I didn't hear much from it.
So he's a state senator from the western part of the state. He was an Army officer, military officer for a number of years, and then in the reserves. He has taught. He's been a teacher at the Army War College. But his political career is essentially as a state senator, where he's not been especially popular among the other Republican senators because he has been so sort of brash and bare-knuckled. Most of those folks have fallen in line because he won the primary, so he's the nominee, so they're supporting him, most of them, for governor. But it's one of those things where in private, most of his colleagues would tell you that they wish that there were a different nominee. His point of view, his ideology, if you were, is very much what you would call hard right or far right. In the way that those words change meaning over time, but what it sort of means today is Trumpy. To be hard right is to be like Trump, and Mastriano certainly has adopted those positions and uses a lot of those terms like America First and other terms that are associated with Trump. He's also been associated with people who call themselves Christian nationalists and who say that while the United States can sort of tolerate people living in the United States who aren't Christians, that the country can tolerate that, but that the country is a Christian nation. He has not used the term himself, but he's been very closely associated with people who have espoused that point of view, which really argues against the whole idea of separation of church and state and the idea that the United States doesn't have a religion. So he's a very much polarizing right-wing figure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
That'll have to be the last word for our panel. I'd like to thank all of our students for participating, and our panelists. We have Bill Pezza, political science professor here at Bucks County Community College, Danny Ceisler, attorney and political strategist, and Craig Snyder, director of Republicans for Shapiro. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you.